Without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce the Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure from Ontario.
Oh my God. In case you weren't sure whether Sean was Irish or not, I think we just confirmed that. Starting with the cheap shots at the Scots in the room. So, I thank you, Sean. I just want to acknowledge something that to me is very important. I don't know anyone who's ever served in the Ontario legislature, during their career and since, has a greater commitment and understanding to the centrality of innovation, to our sustaining our planet, our culture, and our economy that Sean does. And he's been a dear friend and a great collaborator who's ignoring everything I'm saying about him playing with his BlackBerry right now. But he's been a very fine friend, and we did some very exciting things together when I was Minister of Research and Innovation, and he was heading up with Tom Core the Ontario Centres of Excellence, and then some of the stuff that's going on here at Ryerson, Michelle and Levy around the digital media zone, and experiential learning is a big part of that, which is probably a good segue into what I wanted to talk about, which is there's a report that's getting absolutely no attention, which is disturbing to me because I think it's foundational both to electrification for Hydrail and innovation. About 3 years ago, when I was Minister of Research and Innovation, Sean and Tom and I and John Ruffalo and Jim Vasili and a number of other folks who were very concerned about how do you actually get innovation? How do you actually get people to use new technologies? Why are we always seeming to use 50 and 100-year-old technology, especially in transportation? I mean, we're using 100-year-old technology. I mean, it's kind of odd that we live in one of the most advanced technology societies, and we're still using technology that's a century, in some cases, longer. So we approached the Canadian Council of Academies, Elizabeth Dowdswell. If you haven't met Elizabeth, she's pretty powerful, thoughtful, and intelligent woman with incredible gravitas and insight. And we wrote a check to the federal government, not something that we as a provincial government do on a regular basis, but we gave it to the Canadian Council of Academies to undertake a major study integrated into their national study on what drives innovation, how do you measure innovation, how do you understand and how do you measure the social, economic, and cultural impacts of innovation, and what are the key tools that the government has. We also asked them to evaluate how the Ontario government is doing and what are the tools that we have, that we consciously have, to provoke and facilitate innovation and commercialization, and what are the ones that we may not see as tools that we should be looking for. Well, the report came out a month ago to a complete resounding silence. No one has talked about it. I think I may be the only person in Canada other than the authors who have read it. I would say it's one of the most profoundly important foundational documents to everything that we need to do on the public policy agenda. So it is, you can go to the website. I think you can download it for a couple of bucks at the Canadian Council of Academies. And it talks about, I won't get into huge detail in it, but it talks about the 5 critical tools that government has to provoke and involve innovation. And you know what it says the most? So it talks about, grants and research programs and all of those kinds of things. And you know what, it concludes one thing, that the most powerful tool that government has for innovation is procurement and data. So it's interesting. So it says, what do we do the worst in Canada at all orders of government? Procurement. We spend more money doing R&D, solving problems, doing, advanced nanotechnology bandages that save wound care and can save $11,000 per diabetes patient's care annually, but we don't use it. We don't have a procurement policy because procurement is all about compliance, and you buy the 50-cent bandages because when the Auditor General comes in to review your hospital budget, you don't want to have bought a $72 bandage and try to explain. So transportation is not that much different. I mean, we've been running diesel on rail now for 50 or 60 years. GO is our largest provincial transportation infrastructure. It is basically a diesel-based system. We're locked into procurement systems that have no allowance for innovation. Do not look at life cycle costs. Do not look at net return on investment. That our procurement policies are structured in a way that reinforce versus buying traditional technologies without any capacity to purchase anything other than that. So you can spend all the money on R&D, and we spend millions in Ontario. If you actually look at a measure in Canada, whether it's Alberta, BC, Quebec, our success rate of actually creating commercial markets. Water technology, we started the water tap initiative as a province a few years ago. John and I were quite involved in that, which was basically an industry accelerator program to try and create a condition where we didn't have to send people to Singapore to see xenon and Trojan water technology. I was always interested in Singapore when I looked at the new water plant there, which is an integrated sewer water treatment plant, which makes huge sense when you actually think about it, because why would you put sort of 80% potable water into dirty water and then start treating it from zero again? You know, it's a cultural thing. You have trouble sort of connecting the flush sound to the tap that directly, I guess. But it was really interesting because Singapore, not only using almost entirely Canadian technology, they were showcasing it and they were giving tours, and there were little bar leaves on all of these Canadian companies that had all the membrane technology all the way through. I can't find this anywhere in Ontario. I can't find a single municipality that's using its water treatment plants and its infrastructure to demonstrate technology, nor is there any procurement allowance to do that. So whether we're talking about new advanced electrified trains, whether we're talking about hybrid trains, we're talking about new onboard electrical systems on trains, there isn't any kind of sense of doing that. And once you've built a system, your procurement policy almost takes over. So if you've been building diesel and rail, you build diesel and rail. If Bell Canada is your service provider in the north for emergency radio services, you find out that you can't compete anywhere else. And part of the challenge we have, even when we move to new technology, is once you've bought into a system, you almost have to sole source because you bought into the technology platform for that. So how do you create innovation when you lock yourself in early and then you become insensitive to advancements in innovation, and it becomes very, very difficult to do that. Anyway, if you have a chance to read that report, I think it's very instructive for any of us who are trying to change systems to greener, more innovative, more economical systems in the longer run, to actually change the fundamental platform. And I always think in government, I've always said when I was a mayor, when I've been CEO of an organization, and when I've been in the governance business, which I am right now, I've always said to my deputies or my CAOs, the most important thing that we're going to do together is celebrate well-planned failures. Because the test of innovation, of doing anything, is trying something, planning it out brilliantly, evidence-based, data-based, and doing that and making sure that you do it. And if it doesn't work, if it blows up in your face and it's well planned, you can then deconstruct and figure out what you have to do. And I've been through this in my life. We did a tax write-off system when I was mayor that really allowed people to write off the difference between what the cost of a building was and the deficit in revenues, which was about 50%, and we're getting 50% of the cost, we allowed them to write it off against the business property taxes. It was a complete disaster on the front page of the newspapers. And what did we do? We figured out what the problem was. No one had any capital. So we did what every politician would do in the middle of controversy: give more money away. And we actually turned all of those credits into grants, which was like, fortunately it was a long way from an election because the Sun newspaper chain nearly went hysterical. Well, actually, they also hysterical, but they weren't particularly hysterical this time. And within 18 months of correcting and allowing people to monetize and cash out their tax credits to get seed money to build their buildings, we had 36 buildings under redevelopment. And the vacancy rate in the historic center of the city of Winnipeg went from about 63% to less than 10% within 4 years. But it was, what is hard to do in government in the public sector is move from well-planned failures to learn them to well-planned success. So it makes it very hard for government to innovate because everything is scandalized, and the cult of accountability means that the public service gives you things that are tried and true, will not be controversial. As I said, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. Do you know what I mean? And that culture, at a time when we need entrepreneurial, innovative government, has to work in an environment where there's a higher tolerance for risk. Because anytime you introduce a new technology, a new system, or a new innovation, you're moving away from the tried and true and the predictable into less predictable circumstances and a higher chance of failure or embarrassment. So if you look at the world right now, and you look at countries like, China now is building high-speed rail from Shanghai to Paris, and we're still buying diesel. we're doing a lot of stuff with Eglinton Crosstown Line and Shepherd and the Scarborough, which is all electrical, and all of the urban transit we're doing, and it's unprecedented. We're doing the biggest transit build-out. We're doing the biggest transit build-out of electrified transit in 50 years. The Eglinton Crosstown Line is the single biggest transit project ever initiated in 50 years in Ontario. So there's a huge commitment to there, but we're not yet in the world of net new technologies. One of the most courageous things that we ever did, and probably one of the most controversial, was the Green Energy Act, because we actually started down the road to provoking new green technologies. It's very hard to do that today. It's very hard to find the right way to do it. And while everyone can criticize its shortcomings, there is no doubt in my mind that we have a green energy industry here that if we can figure out how to apply it to new opportunities like transit and transportation, that we can advance it much more quickly. But all of the most successful politicians I have found in Canadian history are the ones that did the least. They often are not memorable, but they were never involved in controversy. And so how do we create a culture? So you have to create institutions. Metrolinx allows us flexibility. The Ontario Centres of Excellence allows us flexibility. Infrastructure Ontario can redesign and develop new procurement and AFP processes, which is really a unique model that allows us to construct partnerships between the private and public sectors. And one of the things that we're looking at right now is where we have a whole bunch of high-density development. We're actually looking at introducing completely new models of electrification, higher order transit, of which the private sector is actually looking at paying for up to 50% of, because it unlocks the value for millions of square feet of commercial and residential development in very new clean technology, clean energy developments. But that kind of dynamic, this government has explored through creating different kinds of mechanisms. So I know you probably wanted me to talk more about transit, but I don't think the problem is the technology. I don't think the problem is that we don't have brilliant new ways in which to move people that are cleaner and greener and more efficient. I think the challenge is that we've got to find ways in which the public and private sector actually has a workable pathway in which to introduce these new interventions and mainstream them and bring them into that. So I'm really looking at out of this conference, I'm hoping that comes to it. The last thing I want to say, and then if we have some time for questions, Sean, we'll do that, which is when we're talking about transportation and land use, and this is just my standard plea to people, everyone talks about connectivity, which is a lot about how do you move people from point A to point B. And it's a huge problem. Congestion is bleeding $6 billion a year away from us. Families and individuals are spending 2 hours in cars when they'd rather be spending time with their family. Businesses, which would rather be spending money, hiring new people, improving their technology and their productivity, are subsidizing vehicles that aren't moving on highways where labor and fuel costs are driving disproportionately. If you're just down the street here, Coca-Cola just segregated its logistics and moved it out to the very periphery of the GTA because they had to get uncongested highways to move their goods out. Don Valley, if you look at what's happening in all our old commercial parks where Celestica used to be and all that, they're all emptying out because there's no transportation capacity. When you lose transportation capacity, you lose economic capacity. So Coke went through this weird kind of bifurcation, which was, okay, so we move our trucking out to the very edge of the GTHA, and we move our office down on a subway line so our people can actually get to work and they can live in the neighborhood they work. And then when I talked to the president of Coke, he said, there's not that many neighborhoods in the GTHA where you can live and work. Most of the employment lands up the Don Valley, up in Markham, are not exactly walking distance or transit distance. So this idea of complete communities. So the other issue that I think we always have to start with is like when you talk about energy savings, you don't start with new ways of generating energy. You start with how do you use less of it. And the transit equivalent of that is the issue of proximity. Complete communities where we co-locate as many activities. I was out walking my dog when I went with Sean because we live there for a conscious reason. I think we are on the verge of an environmental existential crisis that no one's talking about, which is we're going to lose 30% of our species on this planet. And as the human beings at the higher end of the food chain, or maybe as someone's pointed out, outside the food chain right now, we're really going to be facing that. And whether it's nicotinoid insecticides and pesticides that are killing off our bee population, losing half of the birds in which pollinate our food supply, and we're in the north, when all of our stuff comes from California, Mexico, our average meal comes from about 5,000 kilometers away, we ought to be more concerned about what sustains our food supply, because I think that's going to be the first impact of the pollutants, the toxins, and the changing climate. I think that's it. You can't just solve it with green technology and moving people in a greener way. you actually have to have people walk. So that little experience, if you look at the neighborhood I live in, I can walk to work, I can take transit, I can ride my bicycle. I can live my entire life without ever needing to get into a car. You know, and I've always said to you, if you want to know whether your life is sustainable, the simplest way to do it, if you can't afford to do it, is live in a way where you can walk to do almost everything you need to do. And if we designed all our communities that were entirely walkable, where you could walk to work, you could walk to a grocery store, you could walk to a theater, you could walk to do most of the stuff you do, our energy costs would be very low, our transportation costs would be really low, our infrastructure costs would be very low, the value of our property would be very high, the quality of our life is very high. But most stuff works against us. We subsidize energy and fossil fuels at an extraordinary rate. Our tax system right now, that land is taxed very lightly. These buildings are taxed very heavily. Property taxes are 2 taxes. We have almost very negligible taxes on land, which makes Walmarts very affordable to build, and we have very high taxes on buildings. So it makes the Bay downtown a very expensive property. So, you know, anything that's in proximity to higher transit is very expensive. Any building that any kind of attempt at proximity is taxed into great difficulty. When we looked at moving our company, when I was in the private sector, from Yonge and Wellington out to a commercial park in Brampton where everyone would have to drive and would increase the cost for employees, our taxes would be 1/3 of what they were by making an environmental choice, living where people could walk near higher order transit. So land use, proximity, all of those kinds of things. Also the final thing, and this will really be the final thing, I know I said that twice now, I'm lied to you twice, I apologize. This will really be the final thing. Which is, you know, there was an interesting study that came out of the National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy before the federal government closed it down and fired 700 scientists. It's a great way to solve the climate change problem, just get rid of all the people who want to talk about it. But we use 8 times as much energy as people who lived in Canada between 1926 and 1956 on average. And we use 4 times as much energy per person as people who lived between about 1956 and 1976. So if you look at our per capita energy use, it's ridiculous. It is just excessive. And you know, when I graduated from high school in the 70s, my quality of life was pretty good. You know, I think most of us didn't grow up in poverty or desperation. You know, we have comfortably for generations lived on a fraction of the energy that our parents and our grandparents did, a fraction of what we do today, and we live on a fraction of the energy of what most people in the world live on a fraction of the energy that we live on. And one of the things that, if you ever see that equation coming down, per capita energy use, I think that's probably one of the best things possible. You know, and these things now, our electronics now for the first time this year use more energy than our entire transportation system does. So our biggest energy use has shifted from transportation to electronics and communication. And the whole idea was this electronic age was supposed to reduce the need for transportation because we were going to be electronically connected, which would reduce our need for physical mobility. So we have some rethinking to do. And I'll shut up there and leave it and turn it over to you, Sean.